come with love and blessings and stuff from the Council of Elders. Do not let your heart be troubled. Trust. Trust. There is lots of room in heaven's house. I've promised to prepare a place for you and to come get you. I will bring you to myself so that you will always be with me. You know the way. Way, truth, life that leads to the eternal. You know me. You know intense, unconditional love. If you don't trust that I rest in everything, everywhere, all at once, and that it rests in me, then trust because of what you've seen me do. You can do all of this too, and more. I realized this week that my first sermon was 20 years ago in this church, in this building, with this community. I don't say that to start out making this sermon about me. I like me. I'm proud of me. But I know that I'm not the center of the universe. I want to start out with a sense of history, of the lives touched and often saved, the joyful exuberance that we witness here of Carolyn and many others singing their hearts out, the words of encouragement we've heard from people standing in this spot, founder, elders, a litany of beloved assistant pastors and student pastors and brilliant deacons. History of the family that we've buried. Mostly so many gay brothers of AIDS. Mostly funerals in absentia when we had no legal rights to our lovers in life or in death. And also our family here in the sanctuary columbarium, some of whom the city turned out to remember and memorialize. Years and years that this air, this earth, these bricks have held our prayer, food, nights and whole lives supported downstairs by shelter. Shelter, one of those words that we've maybe lost some of the meaning of through its use. Shelter from the elements, from rain and wind and cold. Shelter from hunger. Shelter from shame and neglect and violence. That shelter downstairs, all of this history, which I've named just a piece, of which my mere 20 is just a piece, of which this building is just a piece of a New York quilt stitched and weaved and stapled to the LGBT Center and Sylvia's and Marsha Peace Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries and Rusty's and Chelsea's Transy House and Brooklyn Women's Martial Arts, of which our New York community is just one glorious piece in a gorgeous global mosaic that extends to Australia and Scotland and Brazil. There is so much room in every direction. There are so many mansions, baby. That's how I want us to start. Trusting the ancient promises in this passage of spaciousness and sufficiency and plenty. Because in the last few weeks, there have been bans on safe, well-studied, gender-affirming care for minors in Idaho and Indiana, forcing youth off their medication, criminalizing providers. Florida prohibits public funds being used to support gender-affirming health care and interferes with custody and courts in its own and in all states to strip care from supportive parents and guardians. Kansas overrode Governor Kelly's veto of a ban that excludes trans girls and women from college-level athletics. Idaho, Iowa, and Arkansas have joined the anti-trans Olympian, North Carolina, in barring trans folk from using the right bathroom, barring children from using the right bathroom in school. criminalizing us if we use the right bathroom when a minor is present. This year, as of this week, more than 520 anti-queer and anti-genderqueer bills have been introduced, of which 220 specifically target transhumanity. More than 125 attacking health care for trans kids. More than 30 attacking us being free to pee. More than 100 attacking education curriculums. More than 45 banning drag. Jesus is a prayer. These folks only promote parental rights for the parents who hate us. They can't tell the difference between me and a head of lettuce. They only talk about children's safety when, honestly, I think when the children are straight, non-trans, white kids who have citizenship papers aren't being asked to work in the fields or for more than 8-hour days, bring their own lunch to school, and don't get murdered there by guns. It's such a hard needle to thread, it would be funny if it were not deeply, deeply unfunny. There is so much room for us, so much in every direction, baby. Hold that. Trust that. Because in 2023, there have been something like 1.5 mass shootings in the United States every day. Our black kin have been shot holding vapes, holding a shoe, running away, experiencing mental health crises, murdered by police. And we know only some of their names because our dominant imagination requires victims to be above reproach before giving two rats about their lives. Maybe our media and our national capacity for anti-Blacks violence reaches saturation more quickly than the incidents accrue. Sweet Jesus, as a prayer. We have to hold these names and lives and say these names, and I cannot bear so much. Me, twice removed. The vicarious harm done to Black men's mental health. The other physical tolls in Black communities has been known for years, called weathering, in connection with Black childbirth and neonatal mortality. And now Harvard researchers are studying its impact after the murder of George Floyd. Last week we know that Ralph Yarl was shot twice for knocking on a door, and that he had to beg for help from 3 houses. This week we know Jordan Neely was in crisis on a subway car, yelling that the system has failed him and that he was strangled to death for it by someone who strangled him to death and by someone who held him down while he was strangled to death and by a subway car filled with passengers who watched while he was held down, while he was strangled to death. And folks who don't just watch get theirs. Black legislators Justin Pearson and Justin Jones were expelled, and white legislator Gloria Johnson was not expelled from the Tennessee House for voicing protest for actual First Amendment, saying out loud, chanting and shouting in favor of gun regulation after children were murdered in their city school. Trans legislator Zoe Zephyr was expelled from the Montana House after actual First Amendment saying out loud that their law banning gender-affirming health care would lead to the death of trans kids. Because the science has been done. It makes us want to hurt ourselves more when we can't be who we are. People do seem really to prefer that their laws' intended effects be tacit. And I'd mentioned the thing with Dylan Mulvaney and Bud Light, but I just can't bear it. Petty, commercial, anti-rainbow finkery and its violences feel too light, too lampoon in proximity to these harms. I want to remind us again that today's Jesus assures us that there is so much room for us, so many mansions, baby, so much enoughness. Trust that. Trust him. Because we have lived through this time and time again. The capitalist gun complex cycles through its fear, gun sales, and gun violence by design. And the repeated patterns from one president and mayor to the next of police harassment and criminalization, medical negligence and withholding, military oustering, street harassment and violence, redlining, financial exploitation, and the shape-shifting of slavery's evolution through lynching, Jim Crow, disenfranchisement, and mass incarceration has been outlined by historians, lawyers, activists, podcast comics who used to write for Obama. And that's not all. In Jesus' name, as a prayer, there is so much more about transphobia, gun violence, the racism of how many times more likely Black and Latina walkers and cyclers are to be struck and killed by cars, mile for mile, across the country. I've hardly mentioned disability exclusions, ageism, immigration prejudice, bat phobia, sexual violence. I haven't named the profound weariness and grief that any of us carry on any given day, the very old fears and anxieties that tell us that we are not good enough, that maybe have since our brains were still developing, maybe developing around childhood thorns and toxins, that we aren't good, that there isn't enough love in the world to give us shelter. Few of us have escaped this particular trauma, but I think it's also a human need that we all have for 6 to 8 positive affirmations for every negative feedback that we get. I wonder how many of us gets even a 1-to-1 ratio. How many of us struggle then with what Reverend Pat calls old tapes, what I call the static in my head, my spiral, my head being in a scary place, my demons. Jesus has many mansions. I have many names for my shame. Want to trade Jesus? He does. Jesus totally wants to trade. How many of us hate ourselves so much that we can't experience joy for others' accomplishments? We're so hungry for validation, affirmation, whatever, that it feels like somebody is taking food off of our plate. As though if our friend, our colleague hadn't gotten the book deal, the promotion, the salary bump, then we would have. Worse, how many of us begrudge other folks achieving what we already have before we've had a chance to get more? As if we can't all possibly excel. As if we can't possibly all have enough, as if there isn't room for ample, for more than enough, room for play and rest, room for foolishness, room to make mistakes and to learn from them. We can. There is. There is so much room. There are so many mansions, baby. There is so much love for you. The university where I work celebrated Thursday night with a lavender graduation for the LGBTQ and other spring graduates, and last month the student club threw a queer prom. And the Facebook posts were riddled with questions about why. Why do we get an extra graduation prom? Why don't the straights and gender straights get an extra graduation prom? Why don't single parents get a special graduation since they too experience unique obstacles on and off campus because of who they are? And it's really, really hard not to respond in kind. From that foreclosed, bankrupt, zero-sum mindset. It's hard not to answer that we deserve this, that we need it more, to split hairs about which ways of experiencing obstacles are about who we are, and try to create a rubric and a hierarchy of access and inaccess that favors us. But there is no oppression hierarchy. And if there is, frankly, racism takes whatever is the crap version of the gold. Single parents face so many additional obstacles. I'm not going to worry too much about straight prom and non-trans graduation. Those are usually called, prom and graduation. But I'll need to look harder into supporting students who are parents, maybe especially single parents, maybe especially with little kids. People see the gay, homosexuals, and the transes having nice things, and they say, hey, what about me? What about the thing that I care about? And I get it. I am so hungry. I am so hungry to be told that I'm good enough, that I've done well. I need people to tell me that they like how I did this thing, that thing, that they like my haircut, that they like my shoes. At least, please, Jesus, as a prayer, at least as often as they tell me I did whatever wrong, or said whatever bad, or don't have what it takes to do whatever. I don't think I'm alone. Most of us are moths, baby birds, grasping, crying out in our need for someone to what? To what? Listen, pay attention, love us. Tell us that we're good enough. So much feels hard. Maybe more after COVID, maybe after 9/11, maybe after 2016, maybe always. I feel like I need to get to the good news soon though, right? But I'm also not sorry for naming what feels hard. Our folks are hurting, dying, and we mustn't turn away. Stuff feels hard, but Jesus says that there's enough, that there's more than enough. John's Jesus goes on and on about it, so many chapters, so many words, to say that there is plenty. Don't panic, trust, trust. And that's not the good news. It's just the headline. The really good news is the hard part. The good news is to say how. How can this be? How on earth? How can this be on earth as it is in heaven? As we imagine it to be in heaven, as we imagine that there is a heaven, how now, here? Do not let your heart be troubled. Trust. There's lots of room in heaven's house. I've promised to prepare a place for you and to come get you. I will bring you to me so that you will always be where I am and you know the way. You know the way. Truth. Life that lead to the eternal. You know me. You know intense, unconditional love. And if you don't trust that I rest in everything, everywhere, all at once, and that it rests in me, then trust what you've seen me do. You can do all of this too, and more. This is beautiful. It's poetic encouragement. And that is worth a lot, especially now. It gives me hope. This week, Brittany Griner called hope a dangerous thing. I love these promises. I need them for all of the same reasons that people read these verses at funerals. They're gorgeous. They're encouraging. They give hope. But there is no magic words that make this real. No thoughts and prayers. No good intentions or spiritualizing otherness or anything easy that's going to make all the mansions less aspirational and more actual. I love poetry as much as the next queer, maybe more than the average next queer. But biblical poetry and rhetoric and even brilliant exegesis are at least at the level of marginalized existence. They are just pretty words. Petals in the wind. We have to act. We have to stop buying the hoax that there's a cap on food. Stop taking them at their word that there isn't enough space or food or money. We have to believe that there is enough room and space for everyone. There is. There was enough food in this city for Jordan. There was enough space for him and for his pain and his crisis, yes, on that train and in housing. There is so much wealth in New York City, plenty of food and space and money. There is more than enough. There is more than enough. We have to imagine that zero-sum is bogus and start to understand that things that we're told are finite are not, absolutely not scarce. They are sitting in someone's vault. What if we put all of our stuff in the middle of the room and discover that there is enough for everyone to take what they need, that there is enough to spare, that there are 12 bushels left over? We have to reframe. Stop letting capitalism decide the rules. Capitalism did not care about Jordan Neely. It does not care about us, not a single one of us. Get some Nap Minister Reverend Tricia Hersey in your social media feed. Get some Sonia Renee Taylor, The Body is Not an Apology, Good Vibes, Radical Self-Love into your social media diet. Follow Heather Cox Richardson so you can learn about stuff like how the NRA shifted from a sports club to a lobby of arms manufacturers. Let's dose ourselves with anti-supremacy, capitalism, and affirmations. There is already enough. Enough food and space, enough space on subway cars, enough space for cyclists on the roads. Before we can do anything else, we have to believe that this is real. And then we need to act, to change what we do, to do better. We'll need to practice at doing better so we can ball it up a couple of times and then learn from that. It's not hard like calculus, but it's not easy. And it doesn't happen on its own. God is not going to do it for us. That's not how it works. Goodness and righteousness has our back, but we need to be the change that we want to see. The nicest, the most well-meaning person is not going to quit misgendering us until you get off autopilot and think about people and gender and parts of speech and practice. We have to practice saying nice things to each other. Say, good job. Say, you're doing great. I like how you said that. I like the world with you in it. Take time to listen. Listen to people's long, meandering, inefficient stories that don't seem to have a point, that we've already heard more than once, and ask questions. Show interest. Actually be interested, care, and show each other that we care. That takes time that we've been told we don't have, and we have it. There is enough time. There's time to slow down. Drive slower. Watch for runners and cyclists. Wash the dishes to wash the dishes, not to be done washing dishes. The one-to-one stuff, this interpersonal stuff is hard and important, and it is just the first rung, just the first step of the 1,000-mile journey. Cultural change requires systems change, and they can censor the word, and we will keep saying it. Systemic stuff is going to need more of us, critical mass, digging deep. It's going to hurt. It will need us all, but maybe this is where the good news comes in full volume, because that is already happening and has been happening. It is embedded in every awful claustrophobic event closing in on us. Sylvia and Marsha P. created Star, and Chelsea and Rusty built Transy House, and this church feeds and shelters people and empowers people. Brooklyn Women's Martial Arts and the History Archive started in somebody's basement. A global MCC movement started in Troy's living room. Justin and Zoe said what needed to be said, regardless of the payback. And Justin Jones got reinstated, and he carried a child-sized casket into the Tennessee house after protesters outside were kept from carrying it in. That man is not letting expulsion silence him. It is already happening. It has happened. Black Lives Matter mobilized, the 1619 Project, Occupy Wall Street, Angela Davis and John Lewis. Governor Kelly vetoed. Young folks and old folks are showing up at city hall meetings and turning out for elections. We created and we are creating a family and a community to celebrate our lives and to mourn our dead. Scotland and Tampa, Florida, USA are holding the line and taking hits for trans people of faith. Some straight white chemistry professor in the town where I live is running for school board so kids there can maybe still learn history-ish history and read books about puberty and say gay. There's already hundreds of small groups of thoughtful, committed citizens. There are so many mansions, baby. We just need to plug in, reverse matrix, find somewhere to start, to continue, to build. This isn't news, I know, to most of us. And like anything else, we go through our cycles too, of needing to remember and reconnect and recommit. And this is weird good news, but John's Jesus said this stuff before he died, knowing that he was going to die. He's making promises that won't be fulfilled until after Easter. And I think it means that he thinks we've got this. We know the way to what is lasting. We know. We can do all of this too and more, knowing that there is food enough, love enough, so much love to go around. But there are mansions. I love you.
Love
Peace.
You.